One of the things I don't see an awful lot of on YouTube are people using routers. And the reason for that is there's such a fear by so many people, even experienced woodworkers, have this fear of routers. Today, I'm going to show you some tips on how to use a router. I want to help take away that fear and open up a whole new world of all the things that you can do with a router. So let's jump in. So very quickly, there are basically two kinds of routers. There's the small, what we call laminate or trim routers. Some of them are corded. This one happens to be a battery operated. And then there's the larger routers for bigger jobs, bigger bits, more heavy duty. This one is a 3¼ horse compared to this one, which is probably about 1/4 horse. And of course, this is for bigger bits and for doing bigger jobs. And when you try and put bigger bits in a small one like this, what happens is you burn them out because it's just not designed for doing big jobs. One of the things I hear from time to time is people say, well, I got a new router table and I tried to use it and it just pulled the wood out of my hand. And that's because you were feeding the wood from the wrong direction. So today I'm going to show you how to check that and always know. Now you'll see, if you've watched other YouTube channels, you'll see people have these directions where if you hold your left hand here and along the wood, and then or your right hand, maybe it's your left hand, I'm not just sure, and if it points in the direction of your thumb, that's the direction you push the wood from. It's like, I always get confused on those. I never know which one is which. Today I'm going to show you the science of how you can never be wrong and look at the bit every time and know where you're going to be feeding the wood from. So let's start off by looking at a table saw blade. Now, every table saw blade has a flat side, and of course, when you install this in your table saw, the flat side is what you're looking at where you start pushing the wood. So the wood comes into the flat side, and that's the cutting edge, because when you look at the back of the tooth, you can see that it's slanted back. So you wouldn't want to be pushing wood from this direction because it's not going to cut. The table saw blade, of course, cuts in this direction where the flat side cuts into the wood. And that's the same on every tool that you have. Your jointer, your planer, your table saw, and even your router bits work the same. So let's have a look at router bits. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of bit examples here. So this round over bit, here is the face side, the flat face side of that bit, and this is where the action happens. Right there, that's the cutting edge. In this flush trim bit, the same thing. This is the face edge, and right on the edge is where the cutting takes place, right on that sharp edge, because when you look at the back of it, you can see that it's at an angle, just as this flush or this round over bit. See how that's cut at an angle, and that's because that makes a nice cutting edge. Now, both of these bits, when they're installed in a router, they will always spin. Every router will spin exactly the same way. They will always spin in this sort of a direction. The bits and the routers are all made the same, so every router will spin in that direction, and this one will spin the same thing in that direction. So what that means, if the bit is spinning in that direction, what we need to do is the wood needs to enter the bit from the face side. So it needs, there's the face side, and it's going to be spinning in that direction. It's going to be spinning towards where I have the wood right now. It's going to be spinning in the direction of the face. So the wood will have to enter the bit in that direction, and that's what's going to cut the wood. The same thing with the flush trim bit. It has to spin in that direction, and it will. And because that's the cutting action of this bit, the wood needs to enter in the same direction that the wood can be cut. We put it at a bit of an angle so you can see. This is where the wood is going to cut, and you can see the angle in here, and you can see the angle in here, and the wood is going to get cut as it enters the bits in that direction. So now that you know that, you know exactly where you need to either move the router or move the wood into those bits. Let's take a moment to look at some router bits for a second. You'll notice that all of these on my right-hand side here, all of these have a 1/4 inch shank, and although the bits are all different, they all have a common shank compared to these, which have a 1/2 inch shank. Now, if your router only came with a collet for 1/4 inch bits, that's probably all it will take, and that's because it's probably a lightweight router, probably a 1.5 horses, maybe a 1.75 horses. So it's a small, lighter router. If your router came with both collets, 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch, it will take both of these sizes, so you can put whatever you want in it, and it's more of a heavy duty, so it will be more like a 2 horsepower or more. So that's the difference in sizes. Now that you already know what angle these bits spin in, you're probably all looking at them going, yeah, I can see that. See this one here, how the face side, there's the face side, and when we spin it around, you can see the angle. So we know what direction this bit is going to spin, and all of these are the same. Every one of these, if you look at them closely, you'll find that even this one has a face side, has a flat, see that has a flat face side, and as you spin it, a little hard for me to do that, but you can see that it's angled at the back, so we know what direction all of these bits are going to spin on. Now, for example, when we look at bits, you'll notice there's a bunch of them that have bearings on the top, and there are some that don't have bearings on the top. These with bearings on the top, they allow you to either run your bit along a piece of wood like this. So this is a round over bit. So to do a round over bit, you would set the depth to something like that, and it would spin like that along and round over the edge. And the bearing prevents it from digging into the wood any further, because that's the point of a bearing, is either to run along a piece of wood like this or some other template or hard, firm object. These, on the other hand, that don't have a bearing, if you were to run this along a piece of wood like this, it's going to wander, it's going to cut deeper and shallower, it's going to cut all over the place and make a big mess. And that's because this is designed for using either in a router table or with some sort of a jig. And I'm going to show you a couple of those in a little bit. So that's the difference between bearing bits and bits without bearings. So let's have a look at just a few specialty bits that are available for routers. So starting off on this side, this is a planing bit. So if you get rough lumber and you want to plane it down, or maybe you've got some specialty work to do, maybe you're making big tables or something, this is the kind of bit that you would use, and obviously you would put that in a big router. This one is a finger joint bit, and you can see, if I put my finger down there so you can see all of the angles, and this is what you will get from a finger joint bit. That is a finger joint. I know a lot of people call box joints, they call them finger joints, but now you see exactly what that is a true finger joint right there. Over here is what we call a bowl bit, and it's straight up on the sides and then curved over. So this is used usually for making bowls, but all sorts of different things. And of course, the last one, everybody will know what that is. That's a dovetailing bit. So before I bring out some of the jigs that we use for routers, I want to talk about some of the things to take away that fear of using a router. The first thing I tell everybody is, first of all, take your time. We're not in a production shop. Take your time and know what you're doing. And now that you know the direction the bit is always going to spin, whether it's in a router table or you're using it freehand, now you'll know which way to push the bit, because the wood needs to feed into the bit on the flat side of that router bit, no matter what you're doing. The other thing, of course, is if you're using a router table and you've got smaller pieces of wood, or if you're using it freehand, make sure your wood is clamped. or use some push blocks. You can buy these or you can make them. I've got videos on how to make these, and this keeps your hands away from the bit, and that's a good safety thing to keep away from the bit. The other thing, of course, is to wear good eye protection and good hearing protection, because that nullifies that speed and that noise, especially that high-pitched whine that routers can make. And if you follow those, that should help eliminate a lot of your fear of using a router. And of course, the next thing is to just get there and do it and get used to it, and that too will take away a lot of your fear. Let's have a look at some router jigs that you can use. Well, and here's a few of the jigs that I have for routers. Some of them are commercial, some of them I've made myself, and honestly, you can go to Woodwork Web and look up router jigs, and you'll get lots of hits on that, because I've made lots of different jigs for routers. So first of all, this is a commercial one. This is a dovetailing jig. Pretty simple, but it works really well, and it uses the 1/2-inch bit, so that's a jig that I really enjoyed. This is a jig that I made a few years ago. It's basically a datoing jig, so if you're making a cupboard or shelving unit and you want to cut dados into the wood, basically the way this works is you just adjust this. There it is. So you put the wood that you want to make the thickness of, you adjust that, so, and then you lock that down like that, and then this pivots back and forth, and your router sits in here, and these pivot back and forth so that it snugs up your router in there. So when you lay this on your board, on your wood to start cutting your dados, it gives you an exact dado of whatever it is. So even if your bit is a little bit small, you can move it around in there, and it will make that fit in there perfectly. So that's another handy jig. This is another commercial jig, and I did a video for a company called Empower. I like this jig because it does so many things. You can see it does some scroll work. It does a really good job of edging, datoing, mortising, just edge treatments. There's so many things. And look, that's all. It's not really complex. There's not a ton to it, but it just does so many things. So I'm going to put a link to that in. You'll be able to go and have a look at that. I'll put a link to that right there. You can go and have a quick look at that if you've never seen that, because it's an interesting jig to have a look at. That concludes my video for today. Hopefully I've stimulated some interest in routers with you today. I'm Colin Canat for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.